Hi, it's Josh Hinds. I just want to share around an important idea. The idea is that while it's true you can't always control what happens to you, it's also true that you always can control how you react to what happens to you. So again, get that. You may not always be able to control what happens to you, but you can always choose to react in a positive way that's going to move you forward no matter what happened to you. Again, the point of this message, I want to be real clear, is not to say, hey, you know, this or that happened wasn't terrible and just get over it. That's not the case at all. There are things that happen that are out of our control for a whole host of reasons. And of course, things don't work out as well because of the decisions that we make as well in some instances. So the point is not to get into a back and forth and get it, over, well, we shouldn't have done this or we shouldn't have done that. If we'd have done this, it'll work out better. Instead, the point that I want to make is that no matter where you're at, where you find yourself on your path to something better, you don't have to stay stuck there. And that's incredibly important. Incredibly important. So I'm going to share two stories to try to illustrate and make a point that that's absolutely true. Again, fully acknowledging that some things happen out of our control, happen to us, if you will, but that does not mean that we have to give away our power, our ability to change the place that we are if we're willing not to do that. Okay, doesn't mean it's going to be easy, simple, difficult. Doesn't mean it's not going to take, in some cases, some big time sacrifices to make that happen. But my hope is that you realize this is an empowering message, and it does empower you to change the place you are and understand that you get to play a part in this life, in this journey. I like to think of my life as a canvas. And so because it's a canvas, it doesn't mean that I'm living in somebody else's painting. I get to pick up a brush and paint it a little bit like I'd like to. So here are two stories that I hope will illustrate, I believe they will illustrate kind of what I'm saying. Again, this idea that while it may be true that we can't control everything that happens to us, we do get to control how we react to what happens to us. And the way we react is the difference maker. Okay, so first off, example of happened for my father. Father was always an entrepreneur, involved in different businesses, and did well over the years. Well, flash forward to a certain point, he was a real estate developer at the time, and he was involved in, doing a condominium conversion, creating condominiums out of some apartments buildings they were doing. It's a big project. Long story short, he ended up trusting some friends who owned the financial institution in our town. Without getting into the details, basically it didn't work out. The project ended up costing my father's business and our family as well quite a bit of money. We had to start back over from scratch because my father decided to choose the road where he would pay off the people who had done work for him as opposed to just taking maybe a lower integrity approach. Anyway, at that moment, he could have said, this is just terrible. I can't believe this is happening to me, and stayed stuck in that situation. And I have to imagine there were tons and tons of things that he went through wondering why that happened. But in that moment, what could he control? He could control the way he was going to react to that. Would he allow that circumstance and again, to the point, you could look at that situation and say, well, he should have done this, he should have done better, he should have not trusted those people. You can go all down every road you want to, or you can say, gosh, it's just not fair, the world's not fair. You can take all these different approaches, but at the end of the day, what really matters is how he reacted to what he seemingly couldn't control. And I'll tell you what that was. He went back and looked back at his skill set. What do I do well? I know how to start businesses. And so he started, ironically enough, a business in mortgage industry. And that, I'm not going to say like right out of the bat, we came back financially and were provided for. It was a stretch, very difficult in his part, very difficult our family. Many of our family members had to learn how to start from scratch too, because we were on that journey with them. But I can tell you, years later, that business took off, and that past past failure, that thing that happened to us, or that bad decision, whatever you want to call it, was in the rearview mirror. And here's another cool story, the way that fits in. So when that business was started out, if you know my story, you know that I actually started in our family business, when I was 15 years old. It was that same business I told you about before. And because at the time that I got involved, there wasn't a lot of extra money, and to pay me to do small jobs here and there, like some people get to start out in their family businesses. So this actually turned out to be a really good thing, because my father said, well, what can I have him do? Well, he had good sales experience, so he ends up writing a script. Long story short, I learned how to do telephone sales. Now, because I'm so young, I can't really, as you can imagine, meet with the clients, but I can sell over the phone and set the appointments and qualify them. So that's what I did, and got pretty good at that, believe it or not. So just from my own story, if that thing had not happened, if my father hadn't chose to react in a way what he could control, that business that would create the path that I went on wouldn't have existed. You could say. Throughout those years, I got interested in personal and professional development a lot, which were skill sets that got me to the point that I do now, where the book came out from that, and presentations that I've given, and some executive coaching I've done for people for years and years. All those skill sets, the origin story, if you will, the beginning of that came from my involvement in this little business. And this little business came out of that decision not to stay beat down, but to move forward. And I would just add another story, which is in my own story, which is interesting. So I think you'll find it encouraging. So basically, I had been doing telephone sales for all these years, as I talked about, but at 18 years old, out of nowhere, I ended up having a situation happen where I was making phone calls like I'd been doing. I had moved into other capacity and areas in the business, and out of nowhere, I get this, what I call a blocking tick. I think of it as a stutter on steroids, for lack of a better term. And as a result, I ended up with lots and lots of anxiety. It actually lasted for years. And I found myself at a point there where I was like, okay, I think my life's going to look like this. But it was just, what do I do next? I was faced with that situation where, again, seemingly I had no control over that. It just happened. But I could control how I was going to react to it. I could choose how I was going to react to that situation. And the way that what I chose to do made all the difference in the world. So little by little, did the best that I could do. And the main decision I did was I was going to try to stay involved and overcome this adversity. And I won't tell you that it was an automatic thing, but over the years, obviously, was able to overcome it. But in that process, ended up starting what started out as a hobby site, which is getmotivation.com, and I decided to start writing and sharing that way. And as I did that, picked up different skills, worked in that particular business for years, and it just made a huge difference in my life. I'm, again, not telling you that that it was super easy and everything just worked itself out seemingly automatically, but I can tell you in the future, it's made a huge difference. So I hope the ideas shared are helpful to you. Remember, it's your life. Live big.